Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be doing a rough door opening for my BasicShed framing series. This is a fairly simple model and you should be able to complete it in a short amount of time. To make it a little more interesting, I've added some dynamic measurements to just to make it a little more fun. So I've made it so that you can change some of these and the whole model will adjust accordingly. So you'll see that it loses these cripple studs at the top as it gets smaller. And then you can also change the size if if you had a taller door, for example, which I don't know how often that happens, but you can change the size of it, and other pieces will adjust as well. You could also change the width of the king stud, so if we wanted 6 foot or 6-inch studs, everything will adjust with it. Except I didn't know exactly how to do this shim piece. Probably just another 2x6 in there, but I didn't feel like doing it. I didn't think that was really worth it. So this should be interesting and give you some food for thought on how to create your own parametric framing models. So let's get started. So to get started, we'll start a new model and just leave this one here for reference. So I'm going to start a new model, but sometimes I get lost. And we're just going to go into the part workbench and we're just going to add a cube like we have in the past. And we'll make that cube the same way we have in the past. We'll make it 8 feet long. And we'll lay it on its side at 3.5 inches, and its height is going to be 1.5 inches. So standard 2x4 lumber. So now when we zoom out on that, we have our first 2x4, and we'll have to rotate on its ends to start with our king stud. So the next thing we'll do is rotate this stud so that it's sitting on its end. So I'm just going to select that, and I'll use the transform tool. Transform tool tends to be best when you're doing simple rotations and stuff. I'm going to put it at 90 degrees and we're good to go. So then we'll copy this so we have one for a jack stud, one for the cripple, and then we'll go on from there. So we're going to copy the cube. So I'll have 1, 2, so these will be resized. Let's hide these for now, and let's resize this to make it fit in a standard wall opening. So that's going to be minus the bottom plate, and I'm going to do 2 top plates. So it's 1.5 times 3, which is 4 inches. So lumber in the United States, is pre-cut studs are sold at this length, so that's why I'm doing that. So now let's rename this to make it the king stud. And we'll rename this one to make it the jack stud, and rename this one to make it a cripple. Let's generally resize these and move them into shape. Let's just make this one an even 6 feet, and let's show it, and let's transform it just 1.5 inches over, because your jack stud is going to be basically right next to the king stud. And the same thing for the cripple. We'll change the size and we'll just make this 2 feet for now, even though it's going to have to be smaller than that. And let's transform this one. I guess we have to show it first. Let's transform this one up to the top here, and we'll leave it sitting out so we know we have to resize it. So the next thing we'll do is we'll create the lumber for the header. So to create the lumber, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to copy this stud again. Let's rename it header so we're not confused. And now I'm going to transform. So maybe I should have copied this before, but now I'm going to transform this back down. Let's see. So I want to transform it around that axis, and then I want to put it on its edge, so I use the red transform tool there. And now I want to resize it so it's the size of a header. So we'll just make it an 8-inch header, I guess. We'll make it a big one, and then so its length is going to be the width of the rough opening. So we'll leave that for now. So now let's put some. Actually, we'll slide this up, but we won't. We'll just kind of leave it hanging in a random place. So so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to set a dimension for our rough opening, because we can use that to set the width of the header and some other things. I think, and it can be useful. So let's do that next. So to create the rough opening, I want to use the Draft Workbench, the measurement for the rough opening. I'm sorry, and I want it to sit on the back of this model, and it already is, so that's good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the draft measure tool, And with the endpoint tool selected and the work plane tool, so that it stays on that work plane, I'm going to select the endpoint of this line. And I only want it to go out in this dimension, so I'm going to hit X to restrict it to the X axis. And then I'm going to type in 36 inches, hit enter, and then hit X again to exit that tool. Now I just have to pick a place where I want it to sit, which will be there. So now I have a 3-foot dimension. Now I'd like to, let's rename this rough openings. You actually can't really use this because it's only a label. It doesn't have any, like, it's not applied deeply. But so I wanted to show you that. So now I'm going to set this the header. I'm going to set its width based on the rough opening dimension here. So I'm going to go into the length. I'm sorry, set the length of it. So I'm going to use the function tool, and you'll see if I try to type. So to add a dimension for the rough opening, I've moved into the draft tool, and I've set my working plane to the front, which is the base of our whole model, so that it's on the back, because I want our dimension to be attached to this point and move out this way. So now let's do our dimension. So I'm going to click the dimension tool, and I'm going to click on that endpoint, and then you can see I'm going to need to move out in the x-axis, so I'm going to hit X to restrain it in the x direction, and then I'm going to type in 36 inches and then hit enter. Now you see that the line had snapped and I really can't move it anymore, but I don't seem to be able to do anything. That's because we have to hit X again to release it from the dimensional hold. That sounds funny. And then I'm going to snap to that grid point there. So now I have a 36-inch dimension, and we're going to use that to set the length of this board. So let's do that. So before we set anything to this dimension, I'm going to change this to rough opening, because we're going to try to use that into our formula, although that hasn't worked for me in the past, but I'm going to try it anyway. So I'm going to select my header, and I'm going to set the length. I'm going to use the fx, the formula f of x, and we're going to type in rough opening, and we're going to type in distance. So that's the full distance of it, and click OK, and there we have set our we were able to set our header for that. So that's good. The next thing I want to do is I want to set do a dimension for the height of the jack stud. So that's the height of the rough opening. So let's first do our dimension. Now you could do a dimension just by selecting this, but I want the dimension to drive the jack stud, not the other way around. So with nothing selected, I'm going to click on the dimension tool. I'm going to select this endpoint and that endpoint there, and we'll drag it out to the grid. So that's going to be, this is going to be our rough opening height. So I should have called the other one rough opening width. But I think if I rename it now, it won't flow through to this dimension to the formula. Although we might have to try that. So now let's set the jack stud equal to that dimension. So the jack stud length will be rough opening height and distance. So the distance is between this point and that point, which is your actual measurement. So now when we change the rough opening height distance, so you can't change it directly, you have to change one of the endpoints. So I'm going to change, it's the Z endpoint in this case. See how, so our jack stud has changed accordingly. Okay, so now let's move some stuff into place and create some clones. So to move the header, I'm going to use the draft tool. So I'm going to select the header, and I'm going to select the endpoints using the endpoint snap. You see the white dot represents what we're about to select. I'm going to snap it to that point right there. And that's where I do want my header to end up. And then let's move our cripple to that point too. So we'll select that endpoint. Let's see if I can get it. So you can use any endpoint, it doesn't have to be. So I'm going to use those two endpoints. So just the one you can select. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the height of the cripple based on I think the height of the height of the king stud minus the header and this measurement. So we'll do that next. So to set the appropriate lengths for the cripple here, I'm going to do that with the formula tool. So we're going to go to length, and we're going to hit the f of x symbol here, And so this is going to be the length of the king stud. So let's get that first. So king stud dot length, and we're going to subtract out the header width. So we'll do header and width, and then we're going to subtract out the jack stud length. So jack stud dot length. I'm going to hit enter. I need to type length, spell length correctly, and hit enter. If you hit enter and you get a good result, then click OK. And then when you click off of it, you should see the formula in parentheses there. So that sets our cripple stud correctly. Now, a problem with, I probably should have done the clones first, because watch what happens when I'll clone a cripple first, because we'll need one of those. I'm going to transform that over. So we'll just leave it right there for now. And okay, it didn't do it. That's good. Oh, that's okay. Let me try to clone a jack stud, king stud. So we're going to do a clone of this, and we're going to transform it over. And I think this is some problem with the naming space, but you'll see now that I got an error in my cripple. And see what happens is that this formula, for some reason, picks up the wrong value. It wants this 001. So it doesn't hold the value of the that you put in it. It gives it the name of the clone. So let's clone another one and fix the values. So I'm going to clone the jack stud and transform that over, and you can see again in the cripple we got to go in and fix the value there. So I'm just going to kind of do this as I go, just so you can see that how you fix this error. So you hit enter and then click OK. And I need one more clone, which is the header, and so that's going to affect our cripple too. So let's go back in and fix it again. And by doing this once at a time, I'm just trying to keep it from being too confusing for myself. So I think that's all the ones I need. So let's just start moving stuff around. To position this member, the cripple, I'm going to be using the distance measure again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that, and we're going to do in the placement the X position. So we'll click the function button there, and so it's going to be rough opening, and it's going to be the distance. Now you might have to fiddle with this. You might have to subtract a little bit depending on where the origin is of that member. So in my case, it works because the origin is here. If the origin were on this corner, you'd have to subtract out 1.5 inches. So depending on how you set up the lumber member, is going to affect the formula and the positioning. So like this one is going to be so the king stud should be about the same, except in this case we're not going to be doing, it is the X position, so same thing. So the king stud clone, I should say. So let's rough opening distance. And yeah, so that's, so that one's going to be plus 1/2. Okay, so now let's position this one next. So to position the jack stud, it'll be very similar. I'll pick the jack stud, and we're going to go into its X. We'll click the function, and we'll type in rough opening. I wish you could just click on the rough opening thing, but that doesn't work. And it'll be the distance, and I think just like that, and that's good. So next piece, I'd still have to set the header because I didn't give that any kind of tie to this distance here. So let's do the header next. So I'm going to click on the header. I'm going to click on the Z position, or the Z position in the placement, and in this case, it's going to be the rough opening height and just the distance from that. We'll click OK. And now we should be able to make the changes in this. Now you have to do it in the end because the distance is calculated from the start point and the end point. Even though like our Z is, it just is. That's the way it is. So let's change our X position in the rough opening and see if we got everything. Yeah, so now that resizes. And now let's pick a rough opening height, and let's change the Z. We'll make it taller. And what did we mess up? So I didn't move the second clone, so I gotta move that over. And I didn't set that height right, I guess. So we'll have to fiddle with that. So we set the size of the cripple, but I never set the position. So now let me set the position. So the position is just going to be the jack stud, and the length of that, plus the header and the width of that. If I could learn how to type. I'm going to hit enter twice. There we go. And let's see if it took. Yeah. So, and you see it already changed. So we'll have to do the same thing with the clone. So you do have to, you have to put this in a lot of places. But the idea is that, you'll do this once and never do it again, which never works out for me. So for the clone, we'll do the same thing. Now I could see if I can just easily copy and paste this. I don't know. No, the answer is no. It's not easy, but it might be easier than retyping it. I don't know. Now you could go into a spreadsheet and do some of this. It might be easier. To finish this doorway off, we need to position this header. We need to add an array of the cripple studs here, and I need to increase this doorway to a reasonable dimension. This currently is only for average and shorter people. So let's select the stud, and we're going to be, or the header, I'm sorry, I'm going to be setting this formula with parameters. I always say formulaically, that's back from Microsoft Access. So you see I've already put the base Z in. So that's header, placement, base, and Z, and that gives you the the Z position of the origin of this piece, which is the bottom little corner. So now let's set the X. So the X in this case, I'm just going to put 0 because I know that that's the case. And the Y is going to be the thickness of the king stud, and this is the important piece to learn here. So let's get this. Let's get the thickness of the king stud. So I'm going to do king stud and width. So you 3.5. And the reason why we're doing this, and you see that it's positioned correctly now. The reason why we're doing this is this allows us to, and sorry, these things got moved around a little bit. When you array stuff, the order gets changed, and I was playing with the array in between. So watch when I change the width of the king stud. So we'll change it to 5.5. You see that everything resized and this moved along with it. So that allows you to be more flexible. So we're going to change this back to 3.5, and then we'll work on our array up here. So to create the array of cripples, I'm going to select the cripple. We're going to use draft array, and we're only going to be working in the X direction here. So I'm going to do number X is going to be a formula, but number Y is going to be 0. So number of X is going to be a formula of this dimension here, which I think that's dimension 1. So now I got to get back. So it's going to be dimension, and it's going to be distance. Let's see. Distance, yep. And we'll do it divided by 16 inches. Okay. So you see that gives us three of the array. That formula results that it says that there's 3 will fit there. So the question is, this point is, why aren't they showing up? So the last thing we need to do is set an interval for the cripple so that it spreads, so the array spreads it out. So we're just going to put 16 inches into the X interval. So that will put 16 inches along this direction between each item of the array. And you see that that's, once it recalced it put them in place. Now the difficulty is that as this changes, our simple division by 16 won't work, because you'll end up getting, at certain distances, you may or may not have one. So you actually have to do it plus like a little bit more than half the distance, so it automatically rounds up to the next. So you have to play with this a little bit, and I'll probably get that into the when I do the window one. I'll get into that better, but you get the idea for this one. So let's do the final thing, and that's changing the full height of the king jack stud. So I'm just going to go jack stud, and we're going to make it 6 feet. 6 feet 6 inches, let's make it 6, 8. There we go. I don't know what the correct value is. It's something like that. So that's it. That's our doorway, and you know there's some parameterization for this. And if there's interest, I'm going to turn this into a workbench item so that you can just drop a doorway in and set the parameters. But that's a little ways off. I hope you enjoyed my video. You can take a look in the links below. I'm going to be starting a Patreon account to kind of help finance this. And please subscribe and click the alarm bell so you can see the future videos. And I'll see you when we do a window. The exciting thing about the window is I'm going to have it sketch based. So you're going to have a sketch to put in the values of the window, and then all of this will be driven from that sketch. And so